The former Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, I asked, given that Scotland seems to have one foot already out the door, is it going to take the full step?
No, I don't think so. I think if there was a referendum, we'd win it and Scotland would stay in the United Kingdom. But it's going to be a hard battle because people are frustrated, they're fed up, not just in Scotland, but in the regions of England, in Wales. And I see a sense growing right across the whole of the United Kingdom that people feel in the regions and the nations, they're not being listened to, they're not being consulted. Westminster Whitehall is out of touch. And that's why I think we've got to say that at the end of this COVID crisis, we're going to review the way we govern ourselves, the way we manage affairs, whether it's public health or how we manage the economy, recession, industry, employment. And I think we're going to have to get a far better balance between the powers that the nations and regions hold, and I'm talking about the areas around Manchester, Liverpool, Newcastle, Bristol, London, of course, all the different parts of the United Kingdom. They need far more powers of economic initiative, and the centre will have to admit that it cannot do everything itself and that centralisation is not working in the way that it could.
You clearly want more devolution, more powers to the region. Boris Johnson reportedly said there recently in a Zoom call with Conservative MPs that devolution has been a disaster. Do you think he's right?
Well, he's completely out of touch, and that's why he is not popular in Scotland. But neither would he be popular in Wales, where people want devolution to work. And you can see from Andy Burnham in Manchester, Steve Rotherham in Liverpool, Jamie Driscoll, the Mayor of Newcastle, Marvin in Bristol, Sadiq Khan in London, that they're all saying, and Sheffield, of course, with Dan Jarvis, they're all saying they need more power to be able to make decisions closer to home. And there's something quite wrong about the British Constitution now, that we have a multinational state, we have regions with a great deal of different needs and different traditions and different cultures and different desires. But this government has not found a way of cooperating with them, of consulting them, of working with them. And there seems to be no formal mechanisms in place by which the mayors or the first ministers can actually talk to the Prime Minister or talk to the leading cabinet ministers. And this really matters because we failed on test and track, as far as I can see. We were too slow on testing. There's a huge standoff about the local lockdowns. We've got a huge issue coming up on vaccination where it's great what the scientists have done, but unless we have local systems of delivery that are coordinated with the training of people and the supply and, of course, the logistics to get supplies there, then that vaccination thing will not work the way it should. And it's a huge task ahead of us. And so the British way of governing has got to change if we're going to meet the needs and aspirations of people in all parts of the country. At
the same time, though, is there an argument that further devolution does put you further along the path to independence? You wrote in the New Statesman recently, it was naive to think we could create strong Scottish, Welsh, Northern Irish and regional decision-making bodies and automatically expect people to feel more British as a result. Equally, it was naive not to anticipate that devolution could create a megaphone for intensifying resentment. So do you think the last Labour government was naive?
Well, the word there is automatic. We should not have expected that automatically everything would be okay. You've got to build systems where you cooperate between the different administrations, where there's some form of coordination and collaboration, where people are prepared to work together. And that clearly has not happened. We tried it. To be fair to what we were trying to do, I wanted joint ministerial committees and everything else to work, but this is not working. They have not been meeting under the Conservative government other than on Brexit. And you can talk to every mayor and they will say, and Conservative ones will say as well as Labour ones, that they do not feel that they are let into the discussions that matter to their own areas, and therefore we fall down.
You mentioned at the beginning of the interview that if there was another referendum on Scottish independence, that you think the campaign to stay in the Union would win. At the same time, though, polls are showing now a majority for independence, and if the SNP do win a majority at next year's Holyrood elections, do you think they'll have a mandate for another referendum?
I don't think people want a referendum now. And the question is whether you should have a referendum. You could, of course, have a referendum if you wanted to, but should you have a referendum? And the answer is no, I don't think you should have a referendum at this stage when we're dealing with a pandemic. Sorry, we're dealing with, yeah, but look, an election in May, the SNP want a referendum in 2021. We've got to deal with the recession. unemployment is rising. We've got to vaccinate people in Scotland and perhaps a second round. We don't know whether there's going to be a third or fourth wave of this disease. And the idea you can have a referendum during the first 12 months of the next year seems to me quite unrealistic and is a sign that the nationalists are really out of touch with the priorities of the Scottish people.
I wonder how much you think the personalities come into it as well. There's a 100-point difference between Nicola Sturgeon's approval ratings in Scotland and Boris Johnson's. Hers is plus 49, his is minus 57. If Boris Johnson is the face of the campaign to stay, you're going to lose, aren't you?
I think Boris Johnson has got to do something to show that he cares about Scotland, but he's also going to do it for Wales. And he's also going to do it for the regions of England, where, quite frankly, some of his statements have gone down badly as well. You know, as a Prime Minister, and I found this, you've got to spend time bringing people together. In the end, it's you, the Prime Minister, that's got to try to unite the country. You can't rely on different parts of the country coming together automatically. You've got to bring people together. And he has no forum in which he consults the people who are making decisions about this virus in the regions. No permanent forum. There is no constitutional working relationship that is actually operational between him and Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And he's really got to think about that. And I don't want it to be an issue of personalities. I want it to be about how we approach the future of the United Kingdom, because people are really fed up. A lot of people feel that they are treated as second-class citizens. They feel that some of the decisions over the lockdowns were made without taking into account the needs of the North in particular. And I really think we've got to face up to this. You know, as a Prime Minister, you've also got to be 2 steps ahead of events. And this is an issue that's coming down the tracks. Yes, we've got to get vaccination out there, and I do applaud the scientists that have made this possible. Yes, we've got to get the economy back working again. But to do these things properly in the future, to manage public health and to manage the economy better, we've got to have a better way of working together. We've got to have a better way of showing that joint working can bring better results.
Yeah, absolutely critical, as you said, in that fight against COVID. I'm keen to get your opinion on Brexit too, because it does feel as if those talks are reaching an absolutely critical phase this weekend. If Boris Johnson does come back with a trade deal, should Labour back it?
This is very interesting, by the way, because he always takes it to the last minute. And he's always hoping that Angela Merkel or someone will step in. So the Irish Taoiseach stepped in the last time and they made a deal. I think he's hoping that Angela Merkel, who's really chairing the European Council next Thursday, is going to step in. And I don't think you can say what you do about the deal until you know what the deal is. But what's actually happening is, if there is no deal now, I see huge international implications from what he fails to deliver, because we would be in an economic war with Europe that would cost us very dearly. Food, drugs and everything else, we'd find it difficult to get into the country without tariffs and without hold-ups. But we'd also be in an economic war with America, because there'd be no chance of a trade treaty with America. And so Boris Johnson is going to end up as the most isolated Prime Minister in peacetime history, with no friends around the world, because he has simply chosen a path of confrontation when everybody knows that it's in Britain's economic interest, maybe not in the Brexiteers' ideological interest, but it's in Britain's economic interest to get a deal, and to get a deal now.
So hang on a minute, though. If you're saying that a no deal would put us in an economic war with Europe and an economic war with America, surely you think that Labour should back a trade deal?
Well, it's up to Keir Starmer to make his decision, but I would make my decision, and I don't think he's going to make his decision until he sees what the deal is. One of the problems that we've got, if I may say so, Sophie, hold on, one of the problems we got is the difference between a no deal and a deal is becoming quite slim, because the deal that I see coming forward, and I want us to be in an economic relationship with Europe, and therefore I want a deal at this stage. But the deal that is coming forward is quite a difficult one now, because most of the big questions about state aids and about what would happen if Britain didn't follow the level playing field, most of these questions may yet be unresolved by the deal. It looks as if what's going to happen is they're going to say, yes, we'll have tariff-free trade, we'll have quota-free trade, but the minute you breach the level playing field that we want to see happen, we are reserving the right to impose tariffs and impose sanctions upon you. And so you may have an unstable relationship over the next few months, or even indeed over the next few years, because all they can get to in this negotiation is a minimalist deal, which leaves people very uncertain about the path of the economy.
The Chancellor has certainly got his work cut out trying to negotiate the economic impact of Brexit and, of course, as well, the economic crisis of COVID. At the same time, Rishi Sunak is one of the few politicians who seems to have his approval ratings intact. Some people say he's got his eye on the top job. What advice would you give to a Chancellor who might have his eye on moving from number 11 to number 10?
Well, you know, I used to say when I was the Chancellor, there was only two kinds of Chancellor. There were those who failed, and there were those who got out just in time. And if I were Rishi Sunak, I would think that having given out all this money, his problems are really now beginning. And I think he's going to be tested. And I think I supported what he did in March, and a lot of us did. I think he's not done well in the last 2 months with the measures he's taken. I think we've had 5 budget statements, and he has not provided for the recovery in the way that should be done. And I think he faces huge problems in the future, and that will decide his fate, is whether he's a good Chancellor or not whether he wants to be Prime Minister or not. And I think that he's making some mistakes now that he should rectify. And I fear a number of things. Very high unemployment. I think there's 1 million young people who are not working at the moment, and that's a tragedy for future generations, that they cannot get the chance to show that they've got a skill and get a job. I suspect there are hundreds of thousands of businesses that are just being kept alive by loans, but they don't have the economic activity that can guarantee their future. And you need to underpin the economy by greater strength from the Treasury and from the Bank of England than I think is being provided at the moment. So he has got his work cut out, and he must plan a recovery and not rest on his laurels, because we've had a rescue operation. We need a recovery operation now, and I don't think that is forthcoming yet from the government.